It's a big week in college football. Week 8 is upon us, and I want to preview and break down 3 of the biggest matchups this week. We're going to start off with Alabama traveling on the road to Rocky Top to take on Tennessee. The Tide are currently a 3-point favorite going into this game. And both Alabama and Tennessee right now, they're in survival mode. All right, they haven't played their best football in their past 3 games. Tennessee, they've been carried by defense. Their defense has been outstanding. James Pierce Jr., their outstanding star pass rusher, number 27. Look out for him if you're an Alabama fan because he could wreck this game for the Tide. He had a big forced fumble last week in Tennessee's close win against Florida. And not only do they have James Pierce Jr., who's a stud on that D-line, but they got a lot of studs on that side of the ball as well, along with great depth. And it's a large reason why Tennessee has had arguably the best defense in college football this year. They have not allowed more than 17 points in the game all season long. And this defense has been so good that they've been making up for Tennessee's lackluster offense. And that's really surprising to hear because when somebody tells you, hey, what do you think of when it comes to Tennessee? Do you think of them having great defense or great offense? Normally, it's them having a great offense and their defense not being that good. But this year, though, Tennessee's defense has been playing out of this freaking world. And offensively, their past 3 games have been really sloppy. Nico Iamaleava, he was outstanding in their first couple of games until they started to get into the meat of their schedule. You go on the road against Oklahoma, he didn't look that good in that game. All right, but they were able to get up on out of there with the win. And then you struggle on the road against Arkansas. You lose that game. Nico probably has the worst game of his career up to this point. And then you're barely able to beat Billy Napier and the Florida Gators at home. And the thing with Tennessee that is holding back this offense isn't necessarily Nico Iamaleava's inconsistent play. The offensive line has just completely fell apart over the last couple of weeks. Coming into this year, it was believed that Tennessee's offensive line was going to be one of the better in the SEC this year. When their offensive tackles aren't bad, but their interior offensive linemen, their center, their guards have been absolutely disastrous this year. And for them to get beat up the way that they did against Florida is really concerning because Florida's defensive line isn't really that good. But your defense is the sole reason why Tennessee has a good chance to win this game because you're going up against an Alabama team that their defense has been really lackluster the last couple of games, man. Like, they got torched in the second half of that Georgia game. They got torched all afternoon against Diego Pavia and the Vanderbilt Commodores. And then they got torched by Lenore Sellers and the Gamecocks. Like, I wasn't that concerned about Alabama's defense until how they played against South Carolina. And they did force a few key takeaways, but for you to allow Lenore Sellers to have his best passing performance of the season is really scary because Lenore Sellers is not that good of a quarterback, and most South Carolina fans feel like they need to bench him. So if Lenore Sellers, a redshirt freshman, has his best passing outing against you, you got some huge problems on that defense. Their defensive line isn't doing a good job against the run, and they're struggling at generating a push up front when it comes to rushing the quarterback. And they got to make some changes. Womack, their defensive coordinator, I feel one thing that the Tide's defense is lacking is aggressiveness. They don't blitz a lot. They're comfortable with just rushing for, and that obviously isn't working. And if you're Kalen DeBoer, you got to go up to him and you got to tell him, hey, bro, like, if we're going to get beat, I'd rather get beat being aggressive with the increased chance of generating sacks and pressure on the quarterback than allowing these dudes to get all the time to throw because we only want to rush 4 and we can't stop nobody with our secondary struggling and plus with our pass rush not being that good. You got to send extra pressure, and Bama doesn't really blitz that much. They want to run this 4-2-5 defense that isn't going to cut it in the SEC. But offensively for Alabama, you feel confident that they can hold up against elite defense in Tennessee. Because although Alabama, their offense has struggled just as much as their defense, their offense is capable of putting 30 in this game. And 30 points is the magic number in this game for either team. Whoever can get the 30 first is probably going to win. The question is, who is it? Because Alabama, the downfall with their offense the last couple of weeks has been that Jalen Milroe hasn't been playing good football. All right, he has had 3 interceptions in his past 2 games. One of those has been a costly pick 6 or something like that. So for Jalen Milroe, you got to get back to the basics. You got to get back to, taking care of the football, being able to make big throws downfield to Ryan Williams, because where has this dude been? I didn't hear his name called that much against South Carolina. Ryan Williams needs to be the focal point of Alabama's offense if they're going to throw the football against Tennessee. Because their offensive line, although it's more talented than Tennessee's, they haven't played up to the level of talent that they have on that side of the football on that O-line. And Jalen Milroe, when you rush his decision-making and you force him to have to make quick decisions, he struggles. He's not that good in the quick passing game, and when you force him to have to throw in the short, intermediate areas of the field, that's when he's at his worst. He's not that kind of quarterback. So both of these teams have had their fair share of struggles over the last couple of weeks, but for Alabama, I do believe that they have a slight edge in this game for 2 reasons. For one, you have a quarterback that is experienced, that has shown the ability to win these big-time games. Nico Iamaleava, with him being a redshirt freshman and him being in this slump, I don't expect him to be able to outplay Jalen Milroe. Even though Tennessee has a more favorable matchup in terms of their offense against Alabama's struggling secondary, I believe that Jalen Milroe, having the experience in these kinds of games, playing in the SEC championship game last year, playing on the road and Rocky Top, isn't going to affect them all that much. It didn't really affect DJ Lagway and Graham Mertz last week. Hell, DJ Lagway threw the touchdown to send that game to overtime. So the home field advantage is a little bit overstated in this game, because really in the SEC, whether you're playing on the road, playing at home, it doesn't really matter. You can fall no matter what the conditions are, because the SEC is a lot similar to what the NFL is now, due to the transfer portal and NIL kind of closing the gap between the top teams and the middle of the pack teams in this conference. So Alabama, with them having Ryan Williams, Jalen Milroe, a really good group of running backs, I trust that they're going to be able to make enough plays to win this game. Plus, I also trust Kalen DeBoer. All right, I know that Kalen DeBoer, it's hard to trust this dude when you lost to Vandy. You damn near blew it against South Carolina last week, but he has one of the best records among FBS coaches in all of college football, spanning the last 3 years. All right? And it doesn't really matter about style points anymore, because Alabama isn't the only team that's squeaking out close wins against inferior competition. Tennessee was a 14.5-point favorite at home against Florida last week, and they had to win the game in overtime. So it doesn't really matter if Kalen DeBoer is winning ugly, because Tennessee's winning ugly. It doesn't really matter. A win is a win. It doesn't matter how you get it. And Kalen DeBoer, playing in a national championship, being able to beat guys like Steve Sarkisian, Dan Lanning twice last year, he has experience in these kinds of games, and I have a lot of faith in him that he's going to find a way to help Alabama get this win. It's not going to be ugly. It's not going to be decisive, but Alabama's going to find a way to win this game. It's going to be a gritty game. It could be low scoring. I don't think any one of these teams gets to 30. It's probably going to be a game that's going to be decided like 27-20, 27-24, and I love Alabama to win, and I'm taking them to cover. I probably will buy a little bit of points. I'll probably take Alabama minus 2.5, but I trust Kalen DeBoer and Jalen Milroe more than I trust Josh Heupel and Nico Iamaleava. And as good as what Tennessee's defense is, Alabama, with the explosiveness that you have, and Jalen Milroe with the ball in his hands, he's a threat to take it to the house, whether he runs it or throws a home run hitter to Ryan Williams. I don't see Tennessee's offense being able to take advantage of Alabama's lackluster defense due to the struggles that Nico has had with just decision-making and accuracy. He isn't playing with the same confidence he was the first 3 games of this season. This dude obviously is in somewhat of a slump, and I believe that Alabama, with the coaching advantage and the experience that they have at quarterback, wins this game. This Michigan versus Illinois game is really fascinating for several reasons, because both of these teams have a similar style with how they've gone about trying to win games. Both of them are pretty physical. They normally have really good defenses, but the difference between these two squads is that Michigan, they can only move the football running the ball. And Illinois, it doesn't seem like their run game is as good as what it's been in previous years, but their quarterback play out of Luke Altmaier this year has been one of the biggest surprises in all of college football this season. This dude has a 14-1 touchdown interception ratio. He's completing 67.7% of his passes. He's the most improved quarterback in college football this year. And although stylistically, when you think about these two programs and what they've been in the Big Ten the last couple of years, physical football teams, Illinois' identity offensively has kind of changed a little bit. They're not what Michigan is. They kind of used to be a dire version of Michigan, but now they're more of a pass-heavy team. And really, Illinois' chances to win this game comes down to if they can keep Michigan from dominating on the ground. Because if you can hold Michigan to 130, 150 on the ground, that's good enough for you to get the win. Because Michigan isn't really going to get any reliable quarterback play with whoever they start. So they went to this dude named Jack Tuttle. Don't really know too much about him, but he wasn't that impressive when he came in against Washington. And we know Alex Orji and Davis Warren, they ain't the answer neither. And with Michigan being so handicapped offensively, you're going into a fight where you got to last 10, 12 rounds and you only got a right hook to win with. And that's hard to sustain when you're going up against a team that has a somewhat efficient passing attack with Luke Altmaier and 2 really good wide receivers in Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. Pat Bryant leads Illinois in receiving yards and touchdown grabs. Michigan, what they don't have offensively is what Illinois has offensively, the ability to throw the football with 2 reliable receivers. So this game, it's going to come down to who can get the momentum in the second half. Because this is going to be a low-scoring game. We probably won't see a lot of points scored. It'll probably be a 10-10, maybe a 7-7 game at halftime. But in the second half, that's going to determine who wins and loses this thing, because somebody's going to have to pull away. And if Michigan gets down, and let's say it's 24-10 entering the fourth quarter, I love Illinois to win this game. I don't believe that Michigan is a good team when it comes from playing from behind. And I've known that they've had a few games when they've come back and won in comeback fashion. But with how bad their quarterback play is against this Illinois defense, I like Illinois to win this game if they can get up several possessions at any point in the second half. Because if you can force Michigan to have to abandon the run game, you get them off their A game. And how do you force Michigan to abandon the run? Well, put this game in a situation where they can only win it by having to throw the football. Because when you run the football, you can only score so fast. You take a lot of time off the clock, and plus, Every drive has to count. You can't have any wasted possessions where you don't score, because it's harder for Michigan to score than it is for Illinois to score due to how handicapped they are offensively due to their lackluster quarterback play. The thing with Illinois, though, is that getting a lead on Michigan sounds easier said than done, because defensively, when it comes to the run unit, they are allowing 170.8 yards on the ground per game, which is 88th worst in college football. Now, the reason why I still believe that, regardless of the statistics and past performances, Illinois' defense is going to play well in this game is because when they played Penn State, they gave them a tough game. The final score says 21-7, but that was a really close game for the first 3 quarters and a couple of minutes until Penn State was finally able to put the icing on top of the win. But Illinois, with them being able to hang around with Penn State, they can hang around with Michigan defensively. All right, because they're going to be up for this game. Brent Bielema is really familiar with this conference. He knows what it takes to beat a team like Michigan, because his identity for what his offense used to be, how he wanted to win games, was really similar to how Michigan is trying to win games now. Being physical, imposing the will up front, running the football, playing great defense. But Illinois, with them being able to spread the football out, throwing the ball, it's going to hurt Michigan's strategy, because that defense is eventually going to get tired. It's going to set them up to get some huge home run plays. And the thing about Michigan is that they do have a really good defensive line. You got Josiah Stewart, you got Mason Graham, you got a bunch of future first-round talent on that defense. But when that offense can't get anything going and that defense is on the field for 80, 70 plays, eventually they end up getting tired. And that's when I expect Illinois to start generating some offense. And that's why I said that this game is going to come down to which team can create more momentum in the second half, especially once we get late into the third quarter, early in the fourth quarter. I expect Illinois to be that team that can pull away, because they got the ability to be a little bit more balanced offensively than what Michigan is. I don't believe that regardless of how bad Illinois' run defense is, Michigan is just going to gouge them on the ground, running it 40, 50 times in this game, and they walk out with the win. I don't see that happening. Illinois, with Brent Bielema being their head coach, you know, he knows how to prepare for a team like Michigan. He's going to be having this team ready for the physicality that they're about to face, that is the wrecking ball of the Michigan rushing attack. But I love Illinois to win, and they're one of my best bets of the week as a 3-point underdog at home, because Michigan right now, they don't really have identity offensively outside of just running the football. And you can only run the football with efficiency against certain teams until you go up against a team that forces you to have to be balanced. And if Michigan just can't ground and pound you to death, you got a great chance to beat them, especially if you can get up on them at any point of the game with the serviceable lead. And that's why I'm taking Illinois to win. 20-10 is my final score in this game. I believe that it'll probably be a 10-10 game for the first half, a little bit in the third quarter, but eventually Illinois offensively, they get 10 points in the fourth quarter. They hold Michigan to 0, and they win this game due to them tiring out that Michigan defense, because they're on the field for so many plays due to how inefficient Michigan's passing attack is. You got to be able to throw the football in today's age of college football to win games. And with Michigan just being a one-trick pony, I don't see this being sustainable. The difference between this year's Michigan team and last year's Michigan team is that even though they beat Penn State only running the football like 40, 50 straight times in that game, they still had the ability to throw the football. And J.J. McCarthy was a really good quarterback. It's a reason why he got drafted in the first round of last year's draft. You know, you had the ability to throw the football. It's like you wanted to run the football, but you were still able to throw the football when you wanted to. This year, you can't throw the football when you want to or when you need to, because you can't do it. You're only forced to rely on the ground game as your only source of reliable offense, and that isn't sustainable winning football. That's why I love Illinois to win. Illinois is having a really good season, and with the win, they still remain in the race to make it to the Big Ten title game. I'm very excited to break down Georgia versus Texas. This is the game that I've been the most excited for all throughout this season, all throughout the offseason. This was the game that I had circled on the calendar, and I'm a little bit disappointed, okay, because this game isn't as massive as what I thought it would be. Now, obviously, the implications are massive because for Georgia, a loss here pretty much puts you in a territory where you might miss the playoffs if you lose another game. And this is the most vulnerable that we've ever seen Georgia under Kirby Smart within the last 3-4 years because they don't have the same level of talent up front as what they've had in years past. Now, it's not because they've under-recruited, but it's been because the transfer portal and NIL have been detrimental to the key depth that Georgia has normally had on the offensive line and defensive line. And with them not having good offensive line play, you've seen the offensive efficiency take a dip this year. When have you ever seen Georgia not be good running the football this year? They're 89th in college football in rushing yards per game, averaging 127.6 on the ground. And Trevor Etienne, I thought that this dude was going to be unstoppable at Georgia, but he hasn't really been as good as what I expected. And Carson Beck, a large reason why his production has dropped this year is because Georgia is asking this dude to do way more than what he did last year. Last year, you had Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers. You still have some good weapons in the passing game this year. You got Arian Smith, who's been really good. Dominic Lovett is a really good receiver as well. Dylan Bell, he's more than capable of being able to step up and have a big game. I don't think that Georgia is hurting on offense because they don't have a good group of wide receivers. What's hurting Georgia is that they haven't been able to play a complementary style of football. Georgia has never been a team that has overly relied on one thing offensively. They've normally always been a pretty balanced offense with their ability to throw and run the football under Kirby Smart. But this year, though, they passed the ball 56% of the time, which is the 23rd most in all of FBS. And Carson Beck, he is still one of the best quarterbacks in college football, but what we've noticed is that with Georgia not being as stacked as what they've been in years past, Carson Beck has had some struggles because he's not a quarterback that is good when you force him to have to shoulder the load offensively. He'll have some turnovers. He'll have a couple of moments where the game may be a little bit too big for him, where he may have to take a couple of series or two to heat up again. He's been really up and down, really streaky this year. And defensively for Alabama, the same thing that can be said about, well, not Alabama, but the same thing that you can say about Georgia's offense, you can say about their defense. This isn't the best that we've seen this Kirby Smart defense play over the last couple of years. They aren't as good up front as what they've been in previous years. Their best pass rusher, Michael Williams, he's been dealing with an ankle injury ever since week 1 against Clemson, and he's been on the snap count. He's only played 17 total snaps in the Bulldogs' past 2 contests, and it looks like they've been trying to keep this dude healthy for this game. This is where we could probably expect to see Michael Williams play more snaps than what he has in the past 3 contests for the Bulldogs, because now he's healthy and you really need his presence on that defensive line because he's your best pass rusher and arguably your best defensive player on the field as well. So when you get Malachi Williams going, it makes things really difficult when it comes to having success against this Georgia pass defense, because their secondary got torched by Mississippi State's true freshman quarterback last week. And it was really surprising to see, because normally one thing that is a staple of Kirby Smart's defense is that the secondary is always really good. Well, this year, with your pass rush not being that consistent, your secondary play has also kind of dropped off as well. Now, Kirby Smart, he says that his pass rush, although statistically it doesn't look good, they still are able to generate pressure and key moments when they need to. Well, that's going to get tested against Texas. And the thing about Texas this year is that they are without a doubt the number one team in college football. You can't deny it. They have a top 5 offense in points per game. They're scoring 43.2 points a matchup. And defensively, they're number one in points per game allowed, only giving up 6.3 points per game. And why I'm disappointed in this game is because I thought Georgia and Texas were going to be the two number one and two teams in college football. You know, I thought that Texas would be 1A and Georgia would be 1B. But this year, Georgia has more so looked like a top 10 team, more so than they've looked like a top 2 team in college football. And that's why I'm disappointed in this game, because my expectations coming into this season was that these were going to be the 2 top teams in college football, and only one squad has looked like that. Now, you can say that Georgia is the best team that Texas has played up to this point, which is fair. And you also can say that Georgia is the toughest team that Texas is going to play all season long, which I also feel is fair to say. But there definitely is a considerable gap in talent between these 2 teams this year, which is why I'm disappointed in this game, because normally Georgia is probably the best team in college football every single year from a talent standpoint. But this year, though, there is a pretty favorable gap between these 2 schools. Texas, not only do they got the best offensive line in college football, but they also got one of the best defensive lines in college football as well. They got a lot of depth. They got guys that are good against the run. They got guys that can get after the quarterback. And they've also have improved their Achilles heel of their defense last year, which is their secondary. And the thing for Georgia that you have to take advantage of in this game is that even though Texas is stacked everywhere, their quarterback play is kind of just like your quarterback play. You know, Carson Beck and Quinn Ewers, they are really good college quarterbacks, but they are guys that can get a little bit rattled. They can become a little bit streaky, hot and cold during the middle of games. It may take them a quarter or 2 to heat up, and they can start out games a little bit cold. You saw Quinn Ewers in the first quarter and that rivalry game against OU last week. He kind of struggled. And what won that game ultimately for Texas was how good their defense played, and their run game got clicking, and eventually Quinn Ewers started to heat up as the game progressed. When you're playing Georgia, though, you can't afford to get out to a slow start. And we've seen Quinn Ewers throughout the course of his career at Texas have slow starts in big games. Last year, when they played Washington in the semifinals, he struggled in the first 2 quarters and a little bit in the third quarter, and then he got hot in the fourth. You need Quinn Ewers to play an all-around good game from start to finish. He needs to look like the Quinn Ewers that we saw when Texas obliterated Michigan and Ann Arbor. That was probably one of the most complete games that I've ever seen Quinn Ewers play. He was really impressive. If Texas gets that Quinn Ewers, I believe that they could beat Georgia by at least 10 points, which may sound crazy to hear because Georgia is a well-coached team. I got a lot of respect for Kirby Smart, but this ain't the Georgia team that we've been accustomed to seeing in years past. Kirby's going to have this team ready to play. They are going to be motivated, but I believe that this game is going to show more about why Texas truly is the undisputed best team in college football than it does show Georgia being overrated and being overhyped. Because Georgia coming into this year, they had questions due to how big of a hit their depth took due to the portal and NIL. Hell, one of their starting linebackers from last year, Dumas Johnson, I believe it was, went to Kirby Smart after the end of last year, asked to get paid a certain amount, and Kirby Smart wasn't having it, and the dude transferred to Kentucky, I believe. So with the transfer portal kind of hurting Georgia and hitting them hard in terms of their depth, I don't think they match up really well with Texas. Now, that doesn't mean that this game can't be close. I expect it to be a close game, but eventually Texas is going to be able to pull away. And the first half of that Alabama game was really disturbing because it showed you just the gap between Georgia and some of the other elite teams in the SEC. They aren't as talented as teams like Bama and Texas are. However, they've been able to make the necessary adjustments to get back into those kinds of games. Like they were able to make the necessary adjustments to get back in that Alabama game and give themselves a chance to win, although they ultimately lost. And against Kentucky, you won that game in ugly fashion, but I don't really care about style points for Georgia. Because style points doesn't really matter this season. With how crazy this year has been, it's all about surviving and advancing. But eventually, you're going to go up against a behemoth, and that is Texas. And Steve Sarkisian, he's done a great job of building this program up through recruiting and the transfer portal. This is the best Texas team that Steve Sarkisian has had. And you're playing this game at home, which makes it all the more favorable in the Longhorns' favor, in the Longhorns' chances to win this game. It just makes it more favorable for Texas to win this game with them having the better roster, them playing their best football, and them also having the home field advantage. There are a lot of things that favor Texas to win this game. And that's why I'm taking the Longhorns to get the dub ultimately. It's hard to see Georgia losing more than 2 games this year, but that can really happen. And I said before the season that I wouldn't be surprised if Georgia went 9-3 this year. And a lot of you Georgia fans got mad at me. You said I ain't know nothing about football. But the thing about conference realignment that we kind of have overlooked is that certain years you can be a good team like Georgia, but you may not have the record that shows that because of how your schedule turned out. Georgia's 3 toughest games this year are all on the road against 3 of the top teams in this conference. Alabama, Texas, and eventually in a few weeks you got to play Ole Miss. Those teams were right behind Georgia in odds to win the SEC title this year, which is why Georgia is in a really vulnerable position. Because with the loss here, your playoff hopes are on life support, because then you got to tell the committee that, okay, if we win out, our win against Clemson was strong enough that we still deserve consideration to get into the dance. And I'm not saying that Georgia doesn't have a chance to win this game, but it just really feels like Texas has all the advantages that favors them. And that's why it's hard to bet against them, because their roster is better, their coaching is just as good. It's just really hard to bet against Texas winning this game with everything that favors them. I know that Kirby Smart is no stranger to these kinds of environments. He's won tough road games in the past, but I don't think that he's coaching the SEC as crowded as what it is this year. And that's why I'm taking the Longhorns to win. Hey man, have you hit that like button yet? Have you subscribed to the channel? Because if not, what are you doing? It only takes less than a second to do so, man. I love football. You love football. This is the best place to be if you are a diehard fan of football, man. We're talking NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days a year. If you are a diehard football fan, this is the right place for you. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell icon so you don't miss when we drop new content, and go live.